and we did our project at JAPA, so she's going to explain what JAPA is.
So JAPA is an organization it was created in 2008, and it's designed to combat the homeless, specifically around the Des Moines area. Their mission is to create communities of unconditional love, support, and hope for the homeless as we work together to prevent and ultimately end homelessness. JAPA is a nonprofit organization, so they take donations from basically anyone. I know that they ask a lot of like churches, they get help from, and then other agencies and other sponsors. And JAPA has like a variety of programs that are created to try to fix the homeless issue.
So JAPA is located in Des Moines, so fairly close to our school, and they have 3 weekly outcomes. Those are outreach, housing, and education. So outreach would be the survival, support, and hope of the individuals that are homeless. So this would be like going out into the community and giving those individuals what they need to basically survive. So that could be like food, blankets, clothes, stuff like that. And then the housing is the tiny homes and uniquely affordable cottages. And we kind of talk about those a little bit later. And then education is the Kids Making a Difference program. So that focuses mostly on kids, but they do have other programs for adults to basically get them into the workforce and stuff like that. So each week, JAPA volunteers visit on average 194 people living under bridges, tents, and vehicles.
And then when thinking of the main social issues that JAPA targets, obviously homelessness is the big one. But lack of resources is another one that JAPA experiences. And because they are a nonprofit, sometimes it's hard for them to get a lot of resources. But they do have stores around the Des Moines area like Hy-Vee and Trader Joe's that donate a lot. But otherwise, I know that churches and other sponsors donate a lot to JAPA, and basically anyone can donate. But definitely lack of resources is a huge issue that they have. Just because they see so many clients every week, resources are always in need.
So the donations, like she said, they take pretty much anything that you're willing to give them because they are based entirely on donations. So these can come from individuals, families, churches, sponsors, and then other donators. These donations have helped over 360 men, women, and children end their homelessness since 2008, and 86% of them remain off the streets.
And then next, we talked about JAPA's newest project, which is they're building tiny homes, and basically tiny homes, they provide a safe place for homeless individuals, and especially around the Des Moines area, like the winters that they have to survive. The tiny homes definitely help with that. And also there's such limited space and shelters and everything that the tiny homes are a great new thing that they're doing. Hannah and I didn't get to experience volunteering helping with the tiny homes, but it definitely is something really interesting to volunteer with in the future.
So our experience, so this is an example of kind of what the food storage looks like at JAPA. So Saturday mornings, this is the big thing that we do on Saturdays. So all the donations we get from Hy-Vee and Trader Joe's comes in on Saturday mornings, and we're responsible for bringing them into JAPA's warehouse and organizing them based on what it is. And then we would organize the carts that go out on Sundays. So that could be like putting bread on the cart for people or just other resources that they need. We get all that ready on Saturdays.
And then basically on Sundays is when they have the outreach routes. And these typically go from 12:30 to 4:30, but some routes are longer. Sometimes they go until the route gets finished. And normally, if Hannah and I volunteered on the same day for the outreach routes, we would be separated onto different routes. I'm pretty sure they have like 10 and they're all color coded. And basically on the outreach route, you would join the team leader and then probably like one or two other people. And you would get all of your food and supplies for that week onto the car. And then you have the clipboard of all the clients that are on that route. And then you go and see them. And then once you get to one client, there's two routes that go to like the campsites and the individuals that live underneath like tents and bridges and stuff like that. But then the other routes go and visit the aftercare clients, which is basically the people through JAPA that have recently gotten some kind of housing. And both of the ones that I was on was to aftercare clients. And basically when we got there, we would unload all the food and supplies from the car, and then they would come out and they would take any of the food or hygiene supplies that they wanted. And then our team leader would ask them if they needed anything else for the next week. And then we would basically kind of have small conversation asking them about the past week. And sometimes they would end up telling us stories about how they've gotten to where they are, which is really eye-opening to listen to.
Yeah. When I did the outreach routes on Sundays, I was placed in the groups that went to the actual, what's the word I'm looking for?
Campsites.
Yes, campsites. And so that was crazy to me because I could not imagine when it was so cold out living in those forests and having basically nothing. And it was interesting to see like what they asked for. So like one of the things that was super interesting was batteries, which makes a lot of sense because not a lot of people would donate batteries because you can always use them. And so when we were on these routes, a lot of them needed batteries for their portable heaters. And so it was interesting to see, you know, what they asked for, and it made you realize what you took for granted.
Yeah, definitely. Because on the two routes that I went on, I'm pretty sure almost each time there was about everyone asked for toilet paper and everything like that. And it's just so hard to for us to take something like that for granted because it's something that we use every day. And then for them to ask for it like every week, it's really hard to imagine that.
Right. So the next picture kind of shows some of the other donations that they get. So this is like blankets, pillows, hats, gloves, coats, shoes. They pretty much take whatever you are willing to donate. So that kind of gives them a bigger variety of things that they can give to the homeless.
And then the picture right after that one is basically like their food area, and it's where they do like their meal packaging. And on Fridays for a few hours, I volunteered a few times, or we both volunteered for a few times where we did meal packaging to be ready to put on the carts for the routes. So basically, if you like put together items for them to make a certain kind of pasta or salad or something, and then we wrote what meal they can make out of it and put it all in the bag. Basically just making it easy for them to have a meal, because a majority of the time they probably don't have a full meal. So it was really interesting to be able to do that too.
So our opinions on JAPA, I thought it was a great program and a great place to volunteer because they were so welcoming to all the volunteers, and they were so appreciative of all the care and things we did for them. And I thought it was interesting how much of Des Moines JAPA covers, and it's not just like one area of maybe a lower economic status. They seriously reach everybody in the Des Moines area.
Yeah, basically the same thing. I have a really similar opinion. I just thought it was a really well-run organization. And they have such a great mission, and I learned about how much they really do get invested into their lives and start learning about their lives as they're helping them. That was really eye-opening to see for all the volunteering.
So the question of if we had more time at Joppa, what would we want to do? Um, I think we both kind of agreed that one thing we would find interesting is kind of just taking in someone that is homeless and just helping them better themselves, possibly like finding them a job, um, helping them basically end their homelessness and move on with their life. Um, the group that I did the outreach program with, they um, had just finished helping one of the homeless people find a job, and he actually moved into an apartment and had a great life out of living outside and having to rely on other people to help him. So I thought that was very interesting and possibly something Elena and I would be interested in doing.
And then thinking about anything that we would change about Joppa, I think mainly just the only thing that we would change is just the amount of resources that they have, because they are always asking for resources, and because they go and visit these people every week, they're always in need of really any kind of resources, food or hygiene or anything like that. And also something I experienced on the last route was that when they know it's their birthday, they'll bring them like a card, like a special dessert they like. And there was also like bouquets of flowers that we would give to people, and so stuff like that, because it really does make them happy. So just like really any kind of resources like that, they are always in need of.
And along the same lines, just helping these people become more successful um, not only is better for Joppa, but also helps these people get off the streets. So, yeah. Do you have anything to add?
And then we could talk about like in the paper, I had to write about like the thinking of like the traits of a servant leader and how those kind of relate to what we did. Um, the main ones that I wrote about were the traits of listening and healing. And the listening one really comes into play in the outreach routes, because you get to listen to these people's stories, and it's just so eye-opening to hear about like what potentially made them homeless, and then where they are now. Because I remember on like the last route, there was a bunch of people that were telling like personal stories, and a lot of it was that they've had like family conflict. It's just really sad to think about, because that's not something that I've ever experienced with. And then like the trait of healing that kind of comes into play, like the supplies and food that we give them, that kind of helps them heal in a way, because it lets them eat something that's like nutritious for them, and they get supplies like hygiene products and blankets and stuff like that. So yeah.
Yeah, I think another like trait that's important is empathy and like being able to feel empathetic for these people. I think it's very common that when you see like a homeless person on the streets asking for money, you know, your mind is instantly like, what do they need money for? Drugs, alcohol, blah, blah, blah. And when I finally went out on these routes and saw these people living in the freezing cold, you realize like that is completely false. They would do like anything, and they were so kind, and they just wanted the little things like you said, toilet paper or socks or whatever. And it was just crazy to me that that's how they're living.
Yeah, and it's hard to think about that. Not only are they dealing with like their living situation and having been homeless, but they're also, or some of them are dealing with like major health issues. Like on the last route, our first stop to was a guy who's been awaiting a liver transplant, and he's been on dialysis for, I think he said like 3 years, which is crazy. And then like the stop, I think right after that was this woman who's been diagnosed with cancer, and then her daughter got diagnosed with the same cancer, and they are also taking care of 3 granddaughters. But yet, although she's like battling all of these things in her life, she had such a like amazing attitude and mindset about it, almost to the point where you really couldn't tell she was sick because of how like glad and grateful she seemed, especially for us being there. So it's like people like that that really make you want to, you know, help it even more in any way that you can.
Yeah. And I think like going into healthcare, it's crazy to think that with the rising prices of healthcare and insurance that we could ever like turn someone away because they can't pay. But it happens obviously all the time. And like a lot of times, a lot of the people that I spoke to, the reason they were homeless was because they had bills that they needed to pay, but they couldn't anymore. So they had to get rid of something. And it's unfortunate that it had to be their home and their belongings.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's our presentation.